American War for Independence and its impact on the American Indians. Shots are heard. The fighting begins. The War of Independence is about to take place. Massachusetts is where the shots were first heard. The answer is still unknown today of who shot first, the British or the American forces. On April 19, 1775, the war known as the American War for Independence, also known as the American Revolutionary War, began. According to the article Lesson 1, The War in the North, 1775 to 1778, by orders of the Continental Congress in Philadelphia, a fighting force was hastily assembled and placed under the command of George Washington, who had commanded colonial forces from Virginia in the French and Indian War. The American forces were successful when it came to forcing the British in 1776, but this would not be the end of the war. The British were successful in 1776, as well as they captured prisoners like Charles Hubert. It was very common for both sides to have prisoners of war. On Christmas night, Washington planned a surprise attack in Trenton, New Jersey. This attack ended up being a downfall for the American forces because the Redcoats, also known as the British forces, were able to get the upper hand and force the Americans to run for their lives. A couple weeks later, the British tried to take over the Hudson River Valley, but were unsuccessful because the American forces gained France as an alliance, which caused them to take over the battles of Saratoga. Another alliance for America was the Native Americans. Although some Native Americans sided with America, a huge amount of them also sided with the British. One of the most important Native Americans who was an alliance of the British was Joseph Brant. Even though the natives were told by both sides to not join in the fight, they did. Brant was able to talk 4 out of 6 Indians to join the British, and more than likely the other 2 went on to be alliances with the American forces. Washington wanted to avoid another huge encounter, so he and his men settled in the Valley Forge during the terrible winter in 1777 until 1778. During this time, the British camped out in Philadelphia. The British were afraid of being attacked by the French, so they left Philadelphia in June of 1778. Up to this point in the war, the British did not succeed much. During the war, many American loyalists left America. According to the article, How Many American Loyalists Left the United States by Philip Ranlett, over the course of the war, Flick believed 60,000 Americans, of whom 35,000 were New Yorkers, fled what became the American Republic for friendlier British territory. By 1779, the British had stayed clear of America and went on to fight against the French. The war went on to be fought in many different areas. According to the United States History Timeline, War of Independence, May 12, 1780, the worst American defeat of the Revolutionary War occurs at the British capture Charleston and its 5,400-man garrison, along with 4 ships and military arsenal. British losses are only 225. America, on the other hand, began to take over Yorktown. General Washington and his 17,000 men are about to take over until the British raises a flag of truce. At this point, both General Cornwallis, who is the general of the British, and General Washington work out a plea of surrender. According to the article George Washington, although peace and the British recognition of U.S. independence did not come for another 2 years, Yorktown proved to be the last major land battle of the Revolution. In 1782, the Preliminary Articles of Peace did not mention the Native Americans at all, which made Joseph Brant very upset. The British also did not set aside land for the Native Americans, which they were promised. According to Quintard's article in 1782, the House of Commons votes against further war in America. A year later, in 1783, England officially ends war in America. On September 3, 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed by both the States and Great Britain. According to the article Native Americans in the American Revolution, in 1783, under the terms of peace of Paris, without regard to its Indian allies, British handed over the new United States all its territory east of the Mississippi, south of the Great Lakes, and north of Florida, even though much of the land was not British according to its treaties with the native tribes. In other words, the Native Americans' land that they had received from the treaty with Britain was just given away from the British to America, not from the Native Americans. The following month, slaves who served in the Continental Army were also set free.